Hi everyone, welcome to the first episode of the Food Curious podcast. And today we are curious about hummus. Hummus is that delicious spread and dip and savory dish all at the same time, because it's actually technically all three things. Pretty cool, eh? That's all the way from the Middle East and that has made its way to many corners of the world. As a Middle Eastern myself, I still do not understand what people love about this thing. I mean, it is delicious, but it really became popular. It also happens to be the one Arabic thing that is not negatively stereotyped by the media. So yay to that. And yes, I can say that being someone from that part of the world. Remember, make hummus, not war. So there's lots to talk about hummus. What makes the perfect hummus? So many mystical tips and tricks and rumors about what makes that silky, rich, nutty, delicious, savory experience in the mouth. We'll get to that a little later, but there's also a few really interesting facts that are less spoken about, and I thought we could start with those first. Where does hummus originate from? So obviously chickpeas, there's two important components to hummus, which is chickpeas and sesame paste. Chickpeas are said to be endemic to the Middle East, so it's really the bean of choice, and obviously they're gonna come up with some cool shit to make with chickpeas, hummus having been one of them. So it does originate from the Middle East. Sesame is also a very common ingredient in the Eastern world in general, so you put two together and you create this glorious dish. But as to what country or city it really originates from, I'm just gonna give you some good advice, especially if you're sitting around people who are from the area. Don't ask. It's too big of a debate to get yourself into. It does not end well, because everyone wants to argue that hummus comes from Lebanon or from Egypt or from Syria or from Jordan or from Palestine, when in reality, no one knows. And that is fine. Remember, we gotta make hummus, not war. The other thing is, and this is as an Arabic speaker myself, I've always found this so interesting. Did you know that hummus is the Arabic word for chickpeas? So if you go to the Middle East and you ask for hummus, chances are they'll probably understand what you're trying to ask for. But you might just get chickpeas straight up. And in some countries like Syria, for example, hummus doesn't even have the same name. It's called msabbaha. So if you want the spread, like the dip as we know it out here in the West, you're gonna have to ask for msabbaha in Syria. And if you ask for hummus, you're gonna get a bowl of chickpeas. So I thought that was pretty cool because I don't hear lots of people talking about that. So for now, let's break down what hummus is. Hummus is a few key ingredients: chickpeas, tahini, some sort of liquid, salt, spices, salt I already said that, acid, usually lemon or lime, olive oil, and the big debate is garlic. Because not everyone uses garlic, best believe, and that's really a personal preference. You'll find when you travel in its place of origin, some regions will use garlic, some families will not use garlic. It all comes down to tradition and personal preference. I think garlic makes everything taste better, although I've never seen if garlic makes chocolate taste better. So I say yes to garlic. Let's look at each ingredient. Chickpeas, number one. So a lot of people think that chickpeas is like the essential ingredient to hummus. It is not. Like I said, chickpeas just happen to be the bean of choice in the Middle East because that's what they had shitloads of. Pardon my French, but I've already warned that there's some swear words in this. Yeah, this is just how I talk. So chickpeas just happen to be the legume of choice. But in reality, if you substitute it with like lima beans or black beans or lentils, you might experience a slight, subtle difference in taste, obviously in color, but it's nothing going to be anything too dramatic. I'll tell you what the really important ingredients are, in my opinion at least. The debate with chickpeas now is, do you use canned or fresh chickpeas? For canned chickpeas, I have nothing against canned chickpeas. Not everyone has the luxury of time or the patience, or maybe even like, I don't know, some people have a tiny kitchen. Like, I'm very aware of that. So not everyone will have the time to cook chickpeas from scratch, and honestly, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're gonna use canned chickpeas, please, for the life of God, rinse those chickpeas out. You see that liquid it swims in the can? I don't want any of that in the hummus. I know that liquid, which in vegan world has been trending as aquafaba, which is like a very posh name for chickpea liquid. That liquid tastes like metal and chemicals to me. And I don't know what's been sitting in that can, so y'all better rinse those chickpeas out and toss that water out, unless you're cooking it from scratch. So don't be afraid to use canned chickpeas. If you're gonna use fresh, you really should soak it overnight. It'll help you digest the chickpeas a little better, but it'll also make the cooking process way easier. So just soak the chickpeas in an ample amount of water the day before, or the morning of if you're gonna cook them in the evening. And then just cook them in a big pot, again, with lots and lots of water. Remember, the chickpeas is gonna absorb the water like all dried legumes do. And cook them until they are so tender that if you take them in between your index finger and your thumb, they should melt. They should be smooth like butter. This is not like chickpea for a salad. This is chickpea for hummus. So it needs to be super tender. That's one aspect about chickpeas. The other thing is, do you peel it or not? So what am I going on about peeling chickpeas? Don't, like, some of you might be sitting in terror wondering, yo, what's this girl trying to tell us? Peel every chickpea? Ain't nobody got time for that. Well, that's true, no one has time for it. But there has been this big belief that if you peel each and every cooked chickpea, it makes for the silkiest texture in the world. Whether that's true or not is debatable. I mean, I don't do it myself. My brother does. My brother is kind of a purist when it comes to food, and he thinks it makes his hummus taste better. But the reality is that once you are making this specialty in large amounts for like restaurant or catering quantities, no one's peeling no chickpea, okay? Like, I went to Syria every summer growing up, and I never saw no one sitting down peeling chickpeas all day. So I think it's maybe pushing it. I think it's great to try it if you're just working with like 1 can of chickpea and you're only making a small amount. Please feel free to experiment. After all, cooking is all about trial and error and experimentation. But don't feel pressured to do it, okay? The next key ingredient is the sesame paste. So sesame paste, just as a little, to set some context. If you were to go to the supermarket, chances are you might come across 2 types of sesame pastes. You will come across the Arabic one, which is called tahini, or tahine, if you really want to say it in the proper accent. Tahini is raw hulled sesame. But you might also come across Asian, probably more specifically Chinese sesame paste. Because remember what I said, sesame is an ingredient that's very predominant in the whole Asian continent. The Chinese sesame paste is made from toasted whole sesame seeds. So obviously whenever you toast a seed or a nut, it's always going to have a more complex, deeper, almost smokier flavor. And that's exactly what happens with Chinese sesame paste and tahini. And you can use them interchangeably, I want to say, but you have to know what you're signing up for. I have actually tried making hummus with the Chinese sesame paste, and it just gives it a much more bolder flavor. It has a bit more character, and you can kind of tell, like, something's different here. So that's like for starters, okay? So you have the Chinese sesame paste and you have the Arabic sesame paste. The one that we're talking about here is tahini. Like peanut butter, it's basically a paste made from like a nut or seed. Well, peanuts are legumes, but you get my point. It's a paste that looks like peanut butter. Except the difference with it is that you have this layer of oil. So when you get your jar, you have a layer of oil that kind of floats to the top. And before you use it, you really need to stir the jar so that the thick, heavy paste, which has all the flavor in it, that's sitting at the bottom, it should really become one with the oil. So you get one homogeneous texture. If you've tried doing this before, you know that it can sometimes be quite some arm work. So my little tip for you is to leave your tahini jar upside down. Sounds a little crazy, but it was something that it's something I do myself, and it really comes from a little accidental mistake at the kitchen. We received a case of tahini one day. The case was upside down. When I came to open the case, I realized all the jars were upside down. But to my surprise, when I opened the jar, I was like, whoa, this thing is flowing out effortlessly. This is not going to make sense unless you've worked with this ingredient before. But just do me a favor and put the tahini upside down if you're planning on working with it. It's going to save you a lot of arm work. The other thing is, please do not put tahini in the fridge. You are going to end up with cement. Just like oils, when you put them in cold temperatures, they become solid. So this is a room temperature business thing. The other thing is tahini needs water, which will make it into a workable creamy texture, but it'll also change its color to a lighter color. So that's perfectly normal if you notice that. So what you want to do is you want to dilute the texture and the color, but not the flavor. And using water won't dilute the flavor. Interestingly enough, did you know that not all tahinis are made equal? Yes, that is another best kept secret of the world. So, as you're probably familiar with, the Middle East has been a very political, conflicting region of the world, and lots of countries in that area produce their own tahini. And they use different quality sesame seeds or different techniques, which actually translates to a different taste. But for political reasons, some countries are banned from exporting their products to the West. And those countries only happen to have the best tasting tahinis, in my opinion. So a lot of the stuff that we get out here is not the best tasting tahini you'll get, but it can work. So I thought that was a little interesting factoid about how politics and food and access to certain ingredients. Politics and food, that's just part of the food story. So, we spoke about chickpeas, we spoke about tahini, now we need to talk about acid. Acid, in this case, we're talking about lemon or lime juice. This one is so important. I cannot overemphasize that without acid, you will end up with hummus that tastes like a dirty sock. How do I know this? Because I've had hummus that's made without lemon or lime, and it tasted like a dirty sock. Just trust me on this one. The acid in Arabic cuisine, the acidic element is very, very important, and you always need to have this balance of herbal, nutty, earthy, but with a hint of acid in the background. There needs to be just a subtle acidity on your tongue every time you have a bite of hummus. You need to achieve that balance of acid and nuttiness in every bite. So please do use lemon or lime, whatever you really have access to. And in the worst case of scenarios, because, hey, we're not going to be posh on anyone, if you need to use the little bottles of lemon juice concentrate, go ahead too, but obviously fresh lime or lemon is best. Another little thing is, did you know that in war times, or in times of hardship, and I actually grew up seeing my grandma doing this, if you didn't have access to lemon or lime, you would use citric acid. So citric acid is like a coarse salt that basically, if you put it in your mouth, it tastes like lemon. So it's not salt lemon. Don't get the two confused. It's citric acid. So in the worst case scenarios, if you are living in a country that does not sell lemon or limes or lemon juice, go for citric acid. Only a bit though, because that stuff is potent. So that is for the acid. The next little cluster of ingredients is the spices. You need to, like, acid and salt are not going to be enough to bring flavor out from your hummus. You're going to need something like cumin or coriander. Some people add hot pepper. I like to use cumin. I find cumin is really the big one. And here in Jamaica, I definitely like to make use of beautiful Scotch bonnets because it just makes everything taste better, just like garlic. The next ingredient is olive oil. And this, my friends, I cannot emphasize just how important olive oil is. I use it in both my hummus mixture, but also on top for extra flavor and preventing it from crackling when it dries out. So remember, olive oil is both flavor and texture. So what it does is it will elevate the taste through its olivey flavor. But any oily fats also, it's a secret to a lot of chef secrets. It's like, how do you make a silky sauce? Is butter or oil. The more fat you put in a sauce, the silkier it is. That's just cooking science. So it'll also give your hummus an extra silky feel. Garlic, like I said, is a personal preference. I just think all things taste better with garlic. If you really want to be fancy pants, you can use like a roasted garlic. You can use fermented garlic, which would be even bolder in flavor, but that shit is expensive. You can also use garlic powder. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the dehydrated powdered forms of garlic, by the way. Just check to see that it's not mixed with like MSG or sugar, because that can sometimes be the case. So we've covered chickpeas, canned, fresh, peel them or not. Tahini, the difference between Chinese and Arabic, sesame paste, and kind of a few tips and tricks for tahini. Acid, please, you don't want a dirty sock hummus. Put your acid in there. Spices, my go-to is cumin, sometimes a mixture of cumin and coriander. But add something, spices make life a little nicer. Olive oil in the tahini, but also a little bit on top for flavor, but also from preventing it from crackling dry. By the way, someone once asked me about why I put olive oil on my hummus. Like I said, it's to prevent it from crackling dry. And in the Middle East, when they would take out the mezes and the appetizers, and people would just sit and have a very, very long dinner, and the food would sit out, and people are eating and talking and enjoying themselves. With time, that hummus could dry very quickly. So the olive oil is a nice layer, glossy layer to protect it. And then garlic, personal preference. Subtle, bold, that's really up to you. The proportions of all of the above, honestly, I don't have a recipe for you guys right now because I've always eyeballed this. This is just one of those family recipes where you eyeball the thing. It's sensorial. You try to remember what your mom did, what your grandma did, and you just have to use your eyes and your taste in every step. So you have to look at the thickness. You don't want this thing to be too thick. You don't want it to be too runny. And you have to keep tasting for flavor. Those things beat any recipe. And just try to understand the role of each ingredient. So the tahini is a big, bold flavor. The acid needs to be an echo. The salt, garlic, spices, the aromatics need to just enhance, but they shouldn't dominate or take over. The olive oil is for both flavor and texture. The water, which I forgot to cover, you can use either warm water or you can use the water that you cook your chickpeas in. And that's also going to break things down and bring it to the texture that you want. But use the water gradually, because if you add too much, you're going to end up with liquid. If you add too little, you're going to end up with toothpaste. So understand the role of each ingredient and use your senses. Now, what makes the perfect hummus? Is it peeling each chickpea? I'm not quite sure because, like I said, no one has time for that, especially when you're making like big batches. Some people swear by the ice cube method. What is the ice cube method? So, a few years ago, I started hearing about people talking about throwing in some ice cubes instead of, or like using a half amount of water and a half amount of ice cubes while you're blending it in the food processor. And apparently that's supposed to make it super silky. I have tried that myself. It didn't really quite work, and it was also messy and frustrating. But I also don't think it does work because back in the days, people used a mortar and pestle to make hummus. And I doubt ice cubes were involved in that process. So, like I said, give everything a try. You got to figure it out yourself, and you got to try it for yourself. Others say, and this theory I do think is worth giving some credit. Some people say that if you blend out the tahini water and acid separately, and then using that new kind of mixture to mix with the other ingredients, it can help to get a silky texture. This could be true because tahini curdles. So once you start adding water to it, it'll curdle. And I do think it's worthwhile to really mix it out on its own with the water and the acid, get it out of the way, and then use that to mix with the other ingredients. That one is worthwhile, and that's something I try to do as much as I can. But what I personally think it comes down to is a really powerful food processor or blender. You can literally test this out for yourself if you have the equipment. Try to make some hummus in a regular food processor, and then make hummus in a NutriBullet. Or even more, if you have an electric spice or coffee grinder, use that. The results are completely different. NutriBullets or spice or coffee grinders are so powerful in grinding things fine, like extra finely, it's going to do the same thing to your hummus, and you're going to end up with a no lumpy, chunky, extra silky, melt in your mouth hummus texture. And to me, that is really the key secret to a silky hummus. There you go. I just said it to you, and you're more than free to try it at home. How do you eat hummus? Have you tried making it? It's becoming so popular, it's interesting to see, for me, that it comes in all the shades of the rainbow now. Like pink, if you're using beetroot, red, if you're using roasted bell pepper, orange, if you're using pumpkin or carrot, green, if you're using spinach or callaloo out here in Jamaica, etc. In a way, it's cool to celebrate this specialty, to see how the world has embraced it. But some things also do seem off limits, to me at least. Like chocolate hummus, I'm not sure about that one. By the way, if you've tried chocolate hummus, just like message me. I'm still kind of curious to know what it tastes like, but I'm not trying it. Or maybe one day I will, but I'm not making it. I think that's the difference. I'll try it, but I won't make it. As for what do you eat hummus with? So every time we make our tubs of hummus at the kitchen, people always ask me, they always ask me this question, what do I eat this with? I'm like, you can eat it with whatever you want. And I realize like in the West, it's become so wired to eat hummus with crackers or bread. When in fact, remember what I said, it's three things. It's a spread, a dip, and a savory dish on its own. So there are no rules to this thing. Like I eat it off the spoon. I don't know if other people out there do that, but I sure eat it off the spoon. For me, it's just a meal. I sit, I put a tub of hummus, and I eat the whole thing off the spoon. Like porridge. There we go. But you can also obviously enjoy it with crackers or bread. Or you can use it as a dip with your roasted veggies or crudités. That's such a funny word, crudités. Anyway, you can also top it off with loads of things. Like if you want to make it a savory dish, this is what people do, especially like the new generation in the Middle East now. They bring a nice big dish of hummus. They top it off for you. They put like fried eggplants. If you're not vegan, they might put a boiled egg on there. They might put ground beef. all sorts of things. And they'll serve it to you with a warm loaf of bread that was just freshly baked that came out of the oven. And you just have that as a meal, and it's full of protein and it's very filling. And that's just a quick and easy meal to enjoy on your own. So it can be a meal. Another really great use for it is to use it as a spread in a sandwich. Like a falafel sandwich, you can put tahini, you can also just put a layer of hummus. Better than mayonnaise, better than anything else, I tell you. Humans have always loved condiments and dips. I don't know, they just make our eating experience that much more better. Hummus just happens to be one of those things too. And that brings us to the end of our first episode of Food Curious. Today we were curious about hummus. I would love to know your thoughts. I would love to know where you've tried the best one. Have you tried making it? What do you eat it with? If you hate it, I also want to hear from you. I want to hear why you hate it. Let me know. With that said, thank you very much. We'll make these again. Every Food Curious episode will be about a different food topic. Feel free to throw in some suggestions, and we'll also have guests who pop by. Take care for now, and don't forget to stay food curious. It'll make your life a whole lot more interesting.